Brilliant. Hello. So welcome to the second session. I hope those of you that needed to be caffeinated or decaffeinated have been so, and apologies for the long queues. So I'm Pamela Abbott. I'm the chair of Citizen Zoo, which kind of started really here in Cambridge. We're actually members of Cambridge Conservation Forum, which is how we have been able to have this wonderful room today and to have the event in the David Attenborough building over tomorrow as well. And we have here with us today, we have David Thomas, who is working with Cambridge Conservation Initiative in the Endangered Landscapes programme as director of that, and Frans Schepers, one of the co-founders of Rewilding Europe and its executive director. And before I sort of go into when they're talking about the inspirational landscapes across Europe, I just have a little bit of local news that is very hot off the press and quite exciting. So we've just heard about Patagonia and Chile, and I'm sure you'll be wondering what on earth is happening here in Cambridge, here in Cambridgeshire, with some of our lost species. And as of yesterday, our large marsh grasshoppers, which we've been reintroducing in Norfolk, are going to be coming to Cambridgeshire this year. So it's very, very exciting in our most nature-depleted county. And I think it's so important that this rewilding movement is all about everything that everybody can do. And that's kind of over the course of this conference, we'll be hearing about these hundreds of thousands of hectares and kilometres squared. And we'll also be hearing about the smallest of areas. And now we've kind of come from Chile and we're now in Europe. And so I'm going to hand over to Frans and David to talk about rewilding in Europe.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I hope you can hear me all well. No, I can't. I don't know what the volume should work, but maybe someone can do it. Sorry?
We'll try to get it.
Okay, yeah. Wow, what an incredible warming up we had before break. From grasshoppers to big Chilean landscapes and the global megatrends that Alistair told us. And now we're going to Europe. What a step we make. And I'm so happy to do this presentation together with David. We've been working on this for a while, and we know each other for a while, and it's a real pleasure to share with you some of our experiences that we have been working on for the last decade and more on large landscape restoration in Europe. And I just would like to remind you that when we started Rewilding Europe, the word rewilding wasn't used in Europe. I remember I had calls with people in the US and Canada, shall we use that word, and maybe shouldn't, and then they were actually warning us a bit. But we said, actually, this is a really good word. And look where we are now. It's just amazing. That was back in 2010. So we're very happy to be here and share with you. We're going to give you a bit of a context of large landscape conservation. We will introduce our initiatives for those ones who don't know them yet that well. And then we're actually looking into what are key success factors, according to us, on how we should do large landscape conservation in Europe, also towards the future. And then we will finish with a few remarks. So here we go, a bit of context. Everyone knows Europe as a beautiful continent with culture and beautiful cities, but a lot of people are not aware that Europe has a lot to offer. And some of the megatrends that Alistair was referring to, like land abandonment, rural depopulation, wildlife comeback, other things, actually very apparent in Europe and provide a historic opportunity for us here in Europe to start thinking big and looking at the opportunities that we would like to go into more today. And I think everyone is very well aware that the state of nature in Europe is not good. And not only in general, if you look at the Living Planet report and our indexes and all the trends we see, is that there's a huge challenge there. A very bad conservation status within the EU only, but of course also outside the EU, and even also in protected areas. Europe has 26.3%, I think, as protected area, all the different categories in ICN, but even there they are not doing well. And this, of course, affects not only nature, but it also affects people big time. And this is a map we did a number of years ago with partners and looked at the ecological integrity of European landscapes, and the more yellow and the more orange, the more degradation we can see. And these are the three key elements that helped us to define this score, and we call it the rewilding score because it tells us more than if certain species are present or not. It talks about connectivity, about natural processes, and dispersal and connectivity through the landscapes, and trophical complexity. So what is the wildlife situation there. So this is a bleak picture. We have had a lot of degradation, and the big question is, of course, how do we start upgrading?
So working at large scale, it's not just necessary in order to address some of the declines of species and degradation of habitats in Europe, but it brings many kind of practical advantages for us as restoration and conservation organizations. So first of all, I mean, we talk a lot about natural processes as conservationists and rewilders, but you need large areas. You need to be thinking large when you're talking about reinstating these processes. You can't have a wildfire or large-scale natural flooding.
Who's that?
I can see that our colleague is helping us with sound. I wonder if it might be easier with these.
We'll switch them off.
Have less of a boom.
Switch it off.
Let's just check. We just try. I can see what you're doing at the back, trying to get the best volume without giving us a boom. So let's try this.
Okay.
Maybe take that one off.
Yeah.
And
Go on.
we should have another mic here for you, David. Sorry about this. Apologies.
Okay, right, take two.
Take two.
So it's kind of necessary in order to deliver what we want to deliver in terms of natural ecosystem processes. There are efficiencies involved as well. Often when you're working in small areas and you can't rely on natural processes, you resort to management, mowing, coppicing, controlled management of water levels and so on. So working in large areas, thinking about ecosystems at a landscape scale allows you to have the scope to allow natural processes to create the kind of dynamism, disturbance and biodiversity that you're looking for. It's also very practical from a species ecology point of view. A single male lynx has a home range of 2,600 square kilometers. If those are our aspirations, we really need to start thinking big. And it's also important to start thinking big in terms of the services that nature provides us. Hydrological services are a good example. Again, you need to think about managing and rewilding, restoring at catchment level, watershed level, if you're going to provide those kind of services.
So if we then look at what are the opportunities in Europe, what we think are helping us to look at rewilding and nature recovery at scale. Europe has a lot of amazing places and wildlife, and like in the world, we have urbanization happening. More and more people, 3 out of 5 Europeans, or 4 out of 5, are nearly living in urban areas. So it means that some of the landscapes out there are getting more empty, and we see that happening. And I think many of you know, if you go on holiday in France or Spain or Italy on the countryside, you see these empty villages, and that's of course providing lots of challenges. But maybe this can also be turned into opportunities, as we heard earlier this morning. So we do have amazing places. We do have wildlife comeback happening. Also, the enabling environment for us now with the nature restoration law, despite all the challenges, is an opportunity as well. We have a lot of protected areas already mentioned this morning. So imagine these protected areas, and we talk about 62 million hectares of protected area in Europe, in the EU only. Imagine they start rewilding. That's a huge opportunity. That's a lot of land. And of course, the link with climate was mentioned this morning. That's a huge lever. If the climate movement and policy is adopting nature as a solution for both adaptation and mitigation of climate change, that's a huge opportunity there. And it's also very much about connecting, and we heard a lot about this already this morning, with people, and put nature back in the middle of society and not somewhere back in a reserve where you have to cross a fence. And I think the other opportunity is that more and more people are getting tired of the sort of anxiety narrative that we have every day, we hear, and that there is also hope and positivity. And it's actually fantastic to work with nature as a positive force and see the results in front of our own eyes.
Okay, so as Frans said at the start, we're going to kind of kick off just by giving literally a couple of minutes of introduction to our two organizations for those of you that aren't familiar. So the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes program, this is our mission statement. I guess the key things to take home from there are, first of all, the words landscape and seascape. We work at large scale. Our mission relating to kind of connected wilder landscapes and restoring nature to them and of course the emphasis on nature and people, and we'll refer to the role of people in landscapes in quite a few of these slides. Our primary activity is grant making, so probably 95% of our budget and our time is spent on facilitating and providing large grants of up to $5 million each to support landscape restoration in Europe. But we also have a set of programs, activities as part of our strategy, which really both enable restoration within the context of those landscapes, but also aim to kind of amplify the impact of restoration through communications and policy. So this is a map of the distribution of where we're providing grants. So we're currently supporting 13 landscapes across Europe. We're shortly due to add 7 new Seascapes. Those will be announced in March. And hopefully around this time next year or soon after, we'll be announcing another 7 new landscape restoration projects in Europe. So at the moment, the kind of area of influence from these landscapes is about 4.5 million hectares. So we expect to be doubling that to having influence over 9 million hectares by the time that this phase of the program is complete towards the middle of 2026.
Okay, over to Rewilding Europe. Of course, we're not a grant-making organization. We're receiving grants from people that support our work. We started in 2011, so we're a young organization with a central team based in the Netherlands, but with large landscapes working across Europe. And our mission is to demonstrate rewilding at scale and to show the benefits for nature and people, but also to scale up from there. We want those landscapes not to be just the landscapes where beautiful things are happening, but actually to become inspirational examples of what can happen at a much larger scale. So there's a demonstration and a scaling up role that we have taken. And we have our strategy is very much around 2 main components: wild and nature. How do we restore these systems? And we'll go into that into our presentation with examples. But there's also a very strong nature for people component. In fact, those are the 2 main pillars of our work. And then there's 2 cross-cutting programs, if you like, or components, which is building engagement at all levels, from the EU level, European Commission, down to the local landowner and hunter. And then the second cross-cutting issue topic is scaling up. So how do we move from our landscapes to a bigger scale? And as Rewilding Europe, we're not an organization that sort of owns those landscapes. We have set up legal entities, organizations in all these landscapes that have their own boards and directors and teams. And we work together through a network agreement that binds us together, where we have become a distributed network of rewilding initiatives, if you like, that are working together on the same mission, vision, and strategy. So that's what we do as Rewilding Europe, and these are the landscapes where we're working. Currently 11. We are starting to work in France after 3 years of preparations in the Dauphiné Alps. And we will announce that later this year publicly, but you know already. And we're also scoping some new landscapes. We're looking at new landscape works in Ireland and Denmark and in Greece.
Okay, so I think you can probably see from those maps and the list of kind of activities and objectives of our respective programs and organizations that there's a lot of kind of synergy between them. And it doesn't just extend to working within the landscapes on the ground. It's also the other areas of communication, of developing protocols for science and monitoring, to aspects of research, to kind of scaling up and advocacy as well. So we thought that it would be good to actually think about a presentation that combined that experience. Our experience, which extends over 22 landscapes, 32 countries, nearly 10 million hectares of influence within those landscapes. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start talking now about some of the lessons that we've learned from our experience over the last 13 years or so.
Yeah, so and when we were working on this together, looking at what we thought would be sort of the main success factors for large landscape nature recovery, we came up with 8, and I put this picture on, and then later on I saw these are actually 8 kulan, which is on the steppe in Ukraine. We're working together, ELSP and Rewilding Europe and Rewilding Ukraine, to restore steppe habitats, and where we brought these kulan back. So yeah, we're going to take you through, and this is number 1, and it was already mentioned, think big. When we restarted Rewilding Europe, our slogan was, don't think big, think bigger, and that's sort of endless. But it was just to break away from the project thinking, the small little projects that we're all doing. We're running from projects to projects to projects. But why don't we think long term? Why don't we commit for 20 years to places? Because we know transitions of landscapes takes time. There's a difference between a result and an impact. A result you can have today. You release an animal or have another success. But impact is something that needs time and needs much more work. So thinking big, translating that to landscape level means that you start with big places. And our landscapes are at least 100,000 hectares. In fact, there are 200,000 and more, where we look at how can we then restore a natural process where nature can become a creative power, where we don't immediately connect with the current land use, but look at opportunities to change that, and where we put, as I said before, nature at the center. And bringing a new narrative, a new perspective of how this landscape could develop. And where we then see, okay, if this is the long-term vision, how do we then start moving there? And of course, you always have to think about how can you scale up. So we like to work with what we call scalable models, little spinning wheels that you start running, and then they make other spinning wheels start and become bigger and bigger. So you start a process, but the thinking big is really something that is maybe typical for European rewilding and conservation. Look at the story of Chile. We need to think bigger. That's the big message here. And for each of those key success factors, we have landscapes where we work together or independently just to demonstrate. So this is a place in the Central Apennines in Italy where there's a population of Mexican brown bear in the Abruzzo National Park, and it was really not doing well, and it couldn't go out of the park because there was all sorts of issues with the human-bear conflicts and so on. And the people that were actually students that went out of their landscapes and studied in Rome and other places, and they came back and they started this initiative. And this big vision here, the large thinking is that why don't we create a big network of protected areas, and we work with corridors that connect these places and give these bears and a lot of other wildlife a space to then start colonizing, recolonizing these other national parks. And these corridors, we call them coexistence corridors, are the connectors of that landscape, which is over 550,000 hectares. So that's thinking big. That's more than a little project on a species. So this is an example of how you can translate the thinking big into something ambitious, but of course also something that you can feel is realistic to achieve in a certain period of time. So that was number one, David. The second one, we do 4 each. We're not swapping one by one. The other one is, okay, so then you have a landscape, and you look at the landscape and say, okay, but what is missing here? What are the key ecological processes that actually drive nature and make nature flourish? It's not people that are cutting, pruning, and mowing and shooting, whatever we do. We always think in Europe, we all grew up in a cultivated landscape, that if we don't manage, it doesn't work. But of course, that's not true. So how can we give nature the power to restore itself by kickstarting processes that then work on their own to the extent possible, and think about all these different things that are put here on the map, and because those are the principles that have been working for tens of thousands and more years to shape Europe's nature. And there is a possibility for those to restore. Think about removal of dams and dikes to reflood, floodplains and so on. So the goal is then to not restore a painting that needs curating, but because that's what we want to go away from. It's really about creating a system that can look after itself to the extent possible. And this is not about creating wilderness, it's about moving up a scale of wildness. And we have to be very pragmatic about this and not dogmatic. And this is something that makes it very applicable to many. And one of the examples is in the Danube Delta, where we work together also with the ELSP and Rewilding Ukraine, Rewilding Romania. It's a huge delta, and one of the big things we've done mostly on the Ukrainian side, and it's still ongoing, is reconnecting lakes with the Danube River so that these lakes can breathe again because of the water dynamics that are being restored, dam removal, and formerly, there's a lot of infrastructure from the former Soviet era that is being taken out or removed, and where we're trying to restore the water dynamics. So that's a very good example at scale, where we are storing the flooding regime and the water dynamics in this region. The other one is very much about thinking in terms of big wins. So where do you see maybe opposing interest? Where could they actually help each other? We could put ourselves in the situation of our potential partners and say, okay, how can I help you to solve your problem? How can we create win-wins? And there's many examples of how this could be done. And automatically, a lot of us think immediately about this has to be farmers, this has to be agriculture. But there's many other opportunities as well. I'm not saying instead of, but as well where you can work with. And think about flood protection and river restoration. Think about drink water production and natural grazing. Think about protected areas and rewilding. So there's many opportunities to forge partnerships and build coalitions to work together on this new narrative in these landscapes. And one of the examples here I took is a hunting sector. And I know this is something not easy for maybe for a lot of you, but what we have done in Croatia in the very big mountains is to start buying hunting concessions. Not to start hunting, but to actually decrease hunting and completely change the wildlife management. So this area has brown bear, wolf, Eurasian lynx, wildcats, and low numbers of herbivores because of intense hunting, especially after the Balkan War. And we're trying to get control over the wildlife management. You see the numbers here. These are big areas where Rewilding Europe is owning hunting concessions, but not only that, also working with their neighbors. They're adopting their rewilding principles and start doing other ways of wildlife, use of wildlife, which is watching and photography and guided tours. And so they're trying to build a revenue from a completely different model. And the interesting thing is that the Croatian government at the moment revising their national hunting policy, which was very much focused on just getting animals out there and shooting. Now they look at this model and say, wow, this is interesting. We want this to enable this within Croatia in the new law. So this is really thinking big, starting with examples, models, which are scalable, and then you see even that it could become part of national hunting policy. So this is out of the comfort zone of many organizations, but we as Rewilding Europe thought, and there's another place in Europe where this is happening in Romania, this is a really good way of changing the way we manage our wildlife. There's no place in Europe at scale where you have these natural dynamics between predators, prey, and scavengers. So this will be a nice example, I believe. And then the last one on my side is about long-term commitment. So what comes with project dynamics is not only short-term thinking, but it's also not really helping. We have been to areas where people say, there's another project passing by, thank you, nice you're here. And people know that you will be leaving after a few years. And they're not interested, they have seen this. And so we need to make long-term commitments so that people know we're here for the long run. And also become real partners and look at the longer term. And what we have done in all our landscapes, we set up these local entities. Those people work and live in the areas. They live in the villages. They know the neighbors. They know the landowners. And people see this is not a project that is passing by, but it's actually a long-term investment, and they want to be part of this. So that's really important. And the example here I have is the Iberian Highlands in Spain, 850,000 hectares in the center of Spain with a low population density than Swedish Lapland. A lot of people don't know. An amazing area with huge opportunities, but also challenges, of course, in terms of land abandonment. And this is a beautiful example of where just in 2 years' time, and if we are working on this together also with ELSP, an incredible team has been set up and making huge progress, in particular on natural grazing that has disappeared because livestock grazing stopped in most of that landscape, and where there's increased risk of fire, and we're bringing back large herbivores, not sheep, because then you get problems with wolves right away, but the larger animals that can protect themselves and roam freely. That includes, for instance, Przewalski horses and bovines like the toros that some of you have heard of. But that long-term commitment is absolutely key for success. So that was my number 4. Up to you now for the next 4.
Okay. Thanks, Frans. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot of kind of interlinkages between the different points that we make. And this is obviously an issue that runs right across every aspect of working in landscapes. I mean, even in the example we saw from Chile, we saw how people are absolutely critical to the outcomes. And, you know, within Europe, it's an order of magnitude kind of more important. There are probably very few landscapes that haven't historically been shaped by local communities, continue to be shaped by local communities, and where communities and people will continue to be a part of what happens within those landscapes. So the title of this slide, this is a widely recognized issue, of course, is taken from the UN Decade on Restoration, their principles. It's principle number 2 of the UN Decade. And certainly within the context of the projects that we've supported as a program, we've recognized this and seen this as really important in terms of determining the outcomes of projects, is the way they engage local communities, but not just having them as a kind of, a token element of the partnership, but actually meeting these factors here in terms of their full representation in decision-making, recognition of local values and their identity, and also distributing the costs and benefits, of which there are both, obviously, within landscapes, equitably and fairly with local communities. So the example that I want to draw upon here is a project that we're supporting in Finland. It's a large landscape, which actually it's a fascinating landscape. The kind of folklore, the culture there was the inspiration behind Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's an area of peatland, wet mire, bog, lakes, which really since the Second World War has been systematically drained and planted with commercial forestry. And that has created all kinds of problems to the landscape, but also to the river system in terms of sedimentation and impacts on critical fish and also on local communities and many of their traditions. But the organization we're working with there, the Snow Change Cooperative, I mean, there's also automatically a kind of hint in the name. They are a cooperative. They're a very interesting organization in the way that they're constituted and governed. But their founder and director is an indigenous person from the region. Their staff are mostly local. They really understand the area. One of the things they've done is to form a network of what they call river guardians in this very sparsely populated area. And these are local people who live within the landscape, who are providing information, who are helping with the monitoring, and really connecting the project and its restoration and the future of the landscape with their lives and with their future. So my second factor, again here, a second factor for success, is partnership. So again, Frans has already hinted at this. These landscapes are complicated places where a lot of different stakeholders have an interest in terms of food production, in terms of water management, jobs, biodiversity, climate change resilience, different ministries, different departments within government. There's a whole host of different stakeholders that have an interest in the future of these landscapes. We as a donor, we fund not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, but a not-for-profit NGO is never going to achieve landscape restoration within these landscapes working on its own, as indeed really can any organization. So the example I want to draw upon here is one that's closer to home than some of the landscapes that we've heard about so far. It's probably quite familiar to many of you. It's Cumbria, the Lake District. The lake you can see there is Haweswater Reservoir. This is an area and a project that's led by the RSPB, which is the UK's largest conservation charity. The other significant partners are major landowners or land managers. This United Utilities, which is the largest listed water company in the UK and owns and manages much of the watershed. And there's Lowther Estate, which is a large landowner. And then there's Natural England, which of course is an institution that has responsibility for many of these areas. But the project is working with a whole host of other partners to really put together a partnership and a collaboration that delivers on a whole range of different levels. And this is the kind of partnership that is really needed in order to deliver at scale within a landscape. So my next point, point number 7, is all about supportive policies and legislation. Many of these initiatives we've been talking about, you've seen some of the figures in terms of hundreds of thousands of hectares. Those are the areas of the landscape, but very often the organizations that are working there to try and transform those landscapes, they're working in very often much smaller areas, pilots to really demonstrate what is possible. And to some extent, experiment as well. But both to carry out those initiatives and certainly to scale up, supportive policies and legislation is needed. And here I'm really not just talking about policies in relation to agriculture or planning, but also conservation policies as well. Many of our policies that have been created with a conservation purpose, not just within the UK, but throughout Europe, have been designed and put in place for conservation, for maintenance of the status quo, for preservation, really, not for restoration and rewilding, which has a very different approach. It's all about change, not about maintaining the status quo. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this over the next couple of days, and I know some of the workshops tomorrow are focused on the issue of policy and legislation. But we really need supportive policy and legislation if we're going to scale up from within small areas to cover these massive, massive landscapes. And the example I'm going to draw on here, and this is, I could have drawn from any one of the landscapes that we're supporting. This one is in Bulgaria. It's a region on the border between Bulgaria and Turkey. Huge area again, 810,000 hectares in the landscape. The issue there is, or one of the issues, the big issues they're dealing with is relating to forestry. So much of the native broadleaf forest has been cleared and replanted as commercial forestry, black pine, conifer. But with climate change, that has created no end of problems. Trees are now becoming diseased and dying, and where that's not happening, they're much more vulnerable to damaging wildfires. And this is an issue that's recognized both at government level by the State Forestry Company, but also at community level. So what this project aims to do is to kind of support the transition of those commercial pine forests back to deciduous oak forest. But one of the problems they're facing is the forestry legislation and the forest regulations. So the forest regulations have been designed, again, with commercial forestry in mind, and really don't support natural regeneration of broadleaf forests to the extent that you can have very good regeneration, but if it doesn't meet the target in terms of the density of seedlings, they will just plow it up and plant. So what this project is doing is recognizing that as a problem and working with the State Forestry Company on trials to demonstrate that natural regeneration can achieve the objectives that they're seeking, as well as achieving rewilding and nature recovery objectives with much less expenditure and without the problems that I've mentioned in terms of climate change and disease. And they're therefore trying to influence the forest regulations and the forestry guidelines. It's taking a long view. This won't happen overnight, but that's what they're trying to do, to change the policy, the legislation and the regulations. Okay, my last point is about integrated monitoring. So, you know, this is still a relatively new endeavor to start restoring nature, bringing nature back at a large scale. We know a lot, and certainly we shouldn't let the absence of data and information stop us from proceeding. But it makes sense for all of us to, where we are implementing projects, to integrate monitoring and science so that we learn the lessons, the positives and the negatives of what we're trying to do. And this is important both for practitioners so that we can pass that information on, so expansion can take place with the best available knowledge. It's important in relation to policymakers to convince them that this is the right thing to do and they need to introduce the supportive policies that I just mentioned. It's important for communities really to demonstrate to them the kind of benefits that we really believe nature restoration and nature recovery can provide. And it's important in relation to donors as well, so that we can persuade them that this is something that they should invest in and support. And just one example here, again, briefly. This is a project, it's a Rewilding Europe project that the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes program has been supporting in northern Portugal. This is an area that has experienced, as much as Europe has, depopulation and abandonment of farmland, and as a result, widespread growth of scrub, which is very fire prone. causing damaging wildfires. I mean, we recognize that fire within an ecosystem is a natural process, but these are very damaging wildfires in terms of their frequency and intensity. And what this bit of research and monitoring has done, it's used satellite data over a 20-year period to look at patterns of wildfire in relation to patterns of grazing by different species. And what it showed was that natural grazing reduced and fragmented incidences of scrub and reduced the incidence of damaging wildfire. So this provides a really powerful bit of evidence that you can use to policymakers to advocate for more investment and more support for rewilding within these landscapes. Okay, so there you have it. So summary on one slide from 15 years or so of experience across nearly 10 million hectares, 22 landscapes, 32 countries, captured in about, I think, 30 minutes we've been talking for in 8 points. So we really hope that those are going to be helpful. We have a couple of final remarks, though. So there were only 8 Kulans, so we couldn't have 9 points. So we've got a 9th point here, really. So I am representing a donor here, and we're supported by a donor, very generous donor, Arcadia, that will be known to some of you. It's a charitable fund of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. And so this is really a kind of an observation, I think, from donors myself to donors, if there are any in the community. I noticed amongst all those professions and things, the donor wasn't an option, so I don't actually know how many donors there are here, but I have spotted 1 or 2. So moving into this kind of new world of large-scale landscape restoration and nature recovery is risky, it's novel, it's open-ended. So it is maybe uncomfortable for some donors in that context. But if they are going to support it, I believe, that there are a number of things that donors can do. First of all is to enter into this with a spirit of partnership. We've seen many donors where they kind of create a power imbalance between the donor and the grantee. We've found in the grant making that we do that is not productive. You really need to enter this into a spirit of partnership where you're working towards the same goal and recognizing the constraints and opportunities and limitations that exist. We've heard that these are decade-long initiatives, so it needs a similar level of commitment from grantees. We're going somewhere within the Endangered Landscapes program, and certainly the commitment we have from Arcadia is running into the decadal level of support, but it really needs long-term support to see these initiatives through. The other is flexibility. So these are risky initiatives, and particularly within the terms of a long-term grant, things will change. We'll learn lessons, policies will change, the political, social, economic environment will change, and projects will need to change with that. So donors need to be flexible, they need to allow those changes. We tell our grantees, if they're not coming to us on a regular basis with change requests, then they're probably doing something wrong. They're not observing what's going on around them. And linked to that, again, a willingness to take risk. These are risky initiatives. Again, we're really fortunate with our donor, and it's something that we pass on to our grantees, that we are prepared to take risks. We recognize that things won't always go right. We recognize that we don't always have the answers.
Okay, thanks, David. And a few final remarks from my side. So what rewilding practitioners need. First of all, a paradigm shift in thinking, how we look at nature in Europe. And for here, maybe a lot of people realize that, but the majority of how we look at nature in Europe is very much still habitats and species and projects. And obviously, we're pushing a lot for think processes. And if you look at the legislation we have in Europe, which is a fantastic piece of legislation, the Habitats Bus Directive and now the Nature Restoration Law, it already provides huge possibilities for doing this type of work. But we need to look at things in a different way. And that's a challenge still for Europe. There's a lot of traditional work going on where there's many opportunities to do things in a different way. And this starts with the pioneers, with us, with the rewilding practitioners, to show that there's other ways. And so that's an important one. Another one is that if we really want to get to scale, we need to think in terms of scalable models. So there will be another session also run tomorrow by my colleagues in Rewilding Europe about scalable models. So how does that work? How do you, if you have a big landscape with a long-term vision, how do you then start working with scalable models? And how do you design those? And how do you then move from there? This is really important, and especially also to bring in the financial side of things. And we're going to have talks about business models around different mechanisms as well tomorrow and today. So how do we bring in the private sector? How do we bring in commercial funding and investment in the business of nature recovery? That's a big one, because that will help us a lot also to scale up. And a last point, but not unimportantly, as I said before, we're working a long time with this landscape. It's important, David mentioned it, to be able to be flexible. We work with a blended finance model. Philanthropy is a big part of it, but we're trying to also bring in other ways of finance, and very much important as well, for the reasons that we have mentioned, is to have this really flexible and ideally unrestricted. We have a number of donors and supporters that say, we trust you, you have, you know how to do it best and where to spend the money best. We also have donors that are much more earmarked, that provide much more earmarked funding, like European Commission. You have to tick all these boxes all the time, huge administration, and for really innovating and for trying new ideas, you need to have the opportunity to have this and have this flexibility. Yeah, so these were some of the key messages that we wanted to leave with you. It's really nice to look at it from different angles. Obviously, we are a recipient of ELSP money, and so we take we have our view on things, and you have your views. And I think we brought this together in a nice way. I hope so, at least. And I would like to wish you a fantastic 2 days here, and a lot more to come. And I think at some point, David, we should put this together. This is not based on a scientific publication. It's not something we do. We are out there in the field. But I think sharing of these lessons and practices is extremely important for all of us to move faster than we do at the moment. Thank you so much.
So we are going to continue with the kind of integrity of the presentations and just go slightly into your lunch break. So we're sorry about this, but we're hoping that also we'll be kind of ending this bit 20 minutes afters. And these people have done brilliantly to time. We've got some fabulous questions here. A lot of people, I think, from the UK. So we've got first our kind of top questions are around actually in the UK. So how can we, with all our small parcels of land, have this kind of big impact, and what role might the UK government help with in this kind of bigger long term?
That's a difficult
How do we do it here?
I know some people in the room who have answers for this, but yeah, maybe give it a try. Yes, David.
Yeah, so I mean, I think actually we are actually seeing some steps within government itself, and they're being explored through some of the projects that we're involved with, where the kind of cap subsidies have been changed and replaced with ELMS, which environmental land management scheme, and that includes landscape recovery, which is where there's an opportunity for, instead of individual farmers getting grants, subsidies, they actually come together as a collective at a landscape scale and put together a landscape plan. So I think that is one way which certainly, within a particular area, farmers can come together. There's probably other people in this room, I'm sure, that know much more about that than I do, but certainly that's something within our Cumbria Connect project that we're supporting, led by RSPB. They have 2 landscape recovery schemes operating that is actually leading, hopefully will lead to the kind of landscape scale recovery we're looking for.
Cool, thank you. And
maybe just to add is that land access, of course, and we have lots of different systems all across Europe, municipal land, state land, private land, and so on. And of course, in all the landscapes we work, we are dealing with these kind of questions. So how do you have access to land that enables you to demonstrate rewilding and scale up from there? So that element of land is a critical issue everywhere in the places we work. Yeah.
And the other question, which I was going to combine another couple of questions, is about funding. So there was a question about, with so much funding is short term, how do you make these long-term initiatives? And then how do you avoid, when you have business funders, how do you avoid kind of conflicts of interest and greenwashing?
Yeah, shall I start? Yeah. So, it's hard work, fundraising. And we don't have a sugar daddy says, don't worry, Rewilding Europe. Maybe it's one in the room here. We would be very happy. But it's hard work. And it's, of course, a combination. If you look at how our income grew starting in 2011, it was a long time. It was like low. And then I think the last 6-7 years we really made a good progress. And this is because we were starting to show results and impacts, and I think people like us because we're not talking a lot, we're doing much more than talking, and that's what we need. We need less talking and more action on the ground, and then it starts starts supporting, of course, the whole idea, and also with the growth of the rewilding movement and everyone starting to be involved, working at scale, thinking long term becomes more attractive to especially the more mature philanthropic foundations and private individuals, which is our main funding source, apart from EU and lotteries and so on. So it's growing, and of course the big challenge is how do you keep the levels that you have achieved, and how do you build in this financial sustainability? And there's a lot of NGOs here, I'm sure, that know what I'm talking about. So that's one question. The organizations we partner with, not so much the Arcadias of this world and others, but especially corporate sector that approaches us. You won't believe who approaches us to support us. We have a vetting system. We do due diligence. We actually did a due diligence on Amazon recently, and we decided to not work with them. But they were very surprised. But you have to be very careful where you build up your reputation. Okay. And you build up a reputation in 10, 15 years, and you can ruin it in one day, and that's not what we want. So we are very careful about it, but we also don't want to be, we're not risk averse. We like to take risks, but of course it has to be responsible. Cool. So there are systems for that. Yeah.
Thank you both very much. Great talks. Fantastic.